Hello, everyone. So, this is the Horror Advocate, episode 3, called Follow the White Rabbit. I'm Ava, if you've never been here before. This is my series called the Horror Advocate. Here. Hello, everyone. So, this is the Horror Advocate. That would be technical difficulties, but they happen all the time. Okay, so if you've never been here before, I'm Ava, and this is my series called The Horror Advocate. This is episode 3, as I mentioned. So welcome. The first thing I want to do is thank the people I usually thank, which first and foremost are my parents. I want to thank them just for always being supportive and letting me kind of just do whatever it is that I got to do. I want to thank my partner because he always helps me with setup and everything like that. I want to thank my friend Nandi, who always does my hair. And I'd like to thank the Awesome Foundation of Boston for help making the rest of this series possible. So this episode, like I said, is called Follow the White Rabbit, and I called it that just because I didn't really have a specific topic that I wanted to get into on this episode, but I did kind of want to follow whatever train of thought I was feeling before. So the movies that had come to mind to me lately that I felt would be good to discuss. One is Super Dark Times. Now, this movie is not a traditional horror film. In fact, it would be a thriller. It's like a thriller drama, I would say, and a coming of age story. So the reason I wanted to talk about this was because I think this specific film and the story really mirrors a lot of what's going on right now in our society in terms of like mental health, how mental health is viewed, how it's treated, especially in young men. So this is just a story about a group of young boys. Going to estimate that they're in the age group, around the age like 14, 15 years old. Two of them are best friends, and they have other friends that hang around them, but, kind of like hangers on. So they're all in this friend group, and one day they go out, and one of the kids who happens to be a bully, he's bullying one of the kids in the group who doesn't exactly have a lot of like inner strength or self-esteem. He's incapable of sort of like defending himself. He's very quiet. And on this particular day, this one person pushed him a little too far. And in a like scuffle, he accidentally kills him. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this film isn't so much about the setup, because the rest of the film is basically about the cover up. It's about what these kids are going to do to get themselves out of a situation that they didn't intend to get themselves in the first place. And usually in movies like that, that really becomes a character study. So it becomes about the different personalities, like how do personalities emerge in chaos, and specifically in children, and specifically in this case in boys in that age group. So what ends up happening is the boy who's very quiet, he ends up being very empowered by this act. And the other boy, who effectively in the beginning you presume as the leader, starts to take a back seat to the boy who was kind of more like a sidekick to start off. So it really like interrogates this idea of how violence kind of breeds the feeling of power in people who are often powerless or feel powerless. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, especially in the last 2 years in this country. We're seeing a lot of people reacting to powerlessness with violence, and we're seeing a lot of people thinking that that reaction doesn't add up, when in fact it makes perfect sense that that would be where you landed with things. So I think it's a really great movie. It's filmed very darkly, so that's something that I like about it. It creates really great atmosphere that way. The dialogue is very well written. The scenes are shot very well, very close-knit shots, so you're really in tune with the characters. And the wide shots that they end up having are really good for establishment, just to kind of put you where you need to be. But the majority of the shots are kind of close, to make personalize your experiences with the characters. So I think that's a really great movie for people to explore. I want to say that movie came out, I want to say 2018 or 2019 is when Super Dark Times came out. Now I'm feeling like it might be 2017. No, it's 2017. 2017 is when Super Dark Times came out, and I would say that it had a real takeoff in 2018. So I would definitely suggest watching that movie. Another movie that's been on my mind because it came out in 2021, early 2021, January, is Don't Tell a Soul. This is another coming of age story for young men. And this is actually one of my favorite genres of film because I find that horror and thriller films, again, actually interrogate what that experience might be and gives a person like me who has no idea what that might be like an actual glimpse into the window of the terrors or the horrors that go along with that coming of age, because that's just not something you can get, in my opinion, in like a romantic comedy or just a straight up drama, because there's so much intention behind it in those other genres of hiding the truth, whereas horror's complete intention is like revealing the truth. So although it's, again, not a horror movie, it is a thriller, like Super Dark Times, it employs a lot of horror elements. Just to like back up a little bit, one of the things that I really love about Super Dark Times that was a horror element is the infamous weapon. Now, this is something, you think Jason, you think machete. You think Michael, you think the knife. You think Leatherface, you think the chainsaw. And this movie took the sword and made it like a central character to the film. It ends up being more important than some of the speaking actors in this film. It has memory, it has emotion, it has like direction. It's really fascinating to see how they use the sword in that movie. Now, Don't Tell a Soul, it would be tough to say that they directly did the same thing. The weapon in this instance is the well that this person is trapped in. So the story here is it's about two brothers who find a person trapped in a well and sort of what develops after that. Because they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing. Well, shouldn't have been doing, that is arguable. So the two brothers are in a situation where their mom needs money, so they go to commit this like local low-level robbery. Obviously, the older brother's leading the younger brother, and then they are effectively chased by this security guard who happens to see them like coming out of there, and he falls down this well. And then the rest of the movie is sort of about what happens after that. Again, it's another major experience that then creates a character-driven movie because then it becomes about how your personality develops in the chaos. Who are you really? Because essentially that is what the horror film is about. It's about who we really are as people. And in those situations, that's exactly what gets revealed. Because when the pressure's on, that's when people reveal like what their values are, what their limits are, what their boundaries are. So in this instance, one brother takes one side of this and one takes the other. And you sort of see how their opposition is not actually about this situation in the woods, but it's about so much more. It's about, their family dynamics. It's about their mother who's actually ill. And the older brother trying to maintain this level of control when in fact he's not really the strong one. It is the younger brother who's more emotional, who's more in touch with his feelings, who he's hesitant at things. He doesn't just run bullheaded at things, and that's seen as weakness. But in fact, the story unravels in such a way where there's more strength in his actions than there are in his brother's like brutality. And they go through a transformation in their relationship that works its way out through the film. But I would highly suggest getting your hands on this film if you can. It was great. I really enjoyed it. The movie that's been on my mind the most lately, and this is the one I really want to talk about, was The Witch, which came out in 2015. This is probably one of the more polarizing horror films out there because it's like either you really love this movie or you absolutely think it was a waste of time. I absolutely fall into loving it. I think that it is extremely poetic, and I think at times that can be really difficult. So The Witch is set, I believe it's 1630 when we open with The Witch, and this family has been banished from this New England town because the father is like too radical. So this family is pushed out with their radical religious beliefs, and slowly things begin to happen as they're banished into this area that's undeveloped, obviously. And they're banished into this area as a family, and there's witches in the woods, and when they're banished to this area, things start to occur, namely the disappearance of their youngest child, their infant child. So once this happens, the youngest daughter, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, who is fantastic. She did The Queen's Gambit, but for me, the movie, if you really want to get in touch with her abilities, you should definitely check out Thoroughbreds. It's probably one of the better movies I've seen in the last 10 years, really good. So check that out. But so Anya Taylor-Joy plays the daughter, and things just start going wrong. Strange things start happening. The baby disappears, animals are acting funny, crops are dying, things are just going completely wrong. And, they blame it on her. It's like this slow burn. And I think that's what makes the movie so powerful. And I also think that's what makes the movie unviewable for so many people. This movie is a slow burn in a whole other direction. If it was a cause of death, it would be asphyxia. It's slow, it's painful, it's exhausting to go through this movie, because you're going through it at the pace with which things grow in our society, if you can see it that way, because it's a story about a young girl who is effectively being blamed for all the ills that are going on around her. And it doesn't just start, overt. It doesn't start violent. It doesn't start, forcefully. It's very slow. It starts with little things. And I think it's really important to note how they were able to create that tension in your body just by pacing that movie at the same crawl of life, because that's how things happen, right? Look at the situation we're in right now with our country. I'm sure 3 years ago, nobody could have pictured any of these things, but it was a slow process, and there were signs every single day, every single moment, that it would end up here, And so I think that's what's a struggle with that movie, because it represents so much of what women are facing today and what has been a constant struggle throughout time. Slow moving, painful, exhaustive experiences that lead to an end. But in the movie, the end suggests that you embrace what you're told is negative. So she's being blamed for all these things, and she's trying to constantly prove that she's good, that she's not causing these things, that she believes in the right thing, that she is this good person. And in the end, she ends up rejecting everything she grew up with to go into the woods and essentially be part of this coven. And in the end, she's actually floating. So there's a literal lifting up from these other women that society deems bad, negative, treacherous, people that you don't want to be around and things you should stay away from. That's the representation of those women in the woods, and this coven in the woods of women. It's that support system. It's, it's your rights. It's the rights to your body. It's all these things that are a constant turmoil. You do need your sisters, is essentially the message of that movie. You cannot do it alone. And I think that that's a really important message for young girls to have even today, even though it's set in 1630. So that movie is always very fascinating to me. I think it's great. I think everyone should see it. I understand that a lot of people don't like slow moving films, and I won't try to sell you that it's anything other than that. It moves very, very slow, but it is great. So that was, The Witch. I hope you'll take a chance to go see it. I hope that wasn't a terrible explanation. There's obviously a lot more to it than that. I didn't want to give everything away, but I do always do spoilers on endings and things like that, because I like to discuss the movie in a whole of what I feel I saw. Something else I've been thinking about is Friday the 13th Part 2. And I can't remember if I specifically spoke about this one before, but it did recently have an anniversary, because it was released on April 30th, the year it came out. So I was thinking a lot about that movie and sort of the birth of the really smart heroine and the really smart final girl. It's not that there hadn't been final girls before Ginny in Friday the 13th Part 2. It's not that there hadn't been ones before her, but her character was driven on her smarts. She was a psychology major. And so that was made very clear early on that, she was a woman who studied, that went to school, that valued that part of her life. And so that's something that was obviously a big deal to put into a film, and was this, like 1982. So could be 81 though. Yes, but it's a big deal to put that in there. So that's the beginning of her character. Also, when she gets into the showdown with Jason, which is one of the more infamous showdowns that never gets discussed. It's like the first one he really gets into, and it's rarely ever discussed. This is part two. So in part two is also when he has the sack over his head with the eye hole cut out. He doesn't have the hockey mask until 3. So him and Ginny have this big showdown, and this is the infamous scene where she uses her psychology and pretends to be his mother talking to him as a way of controlling him and getting out of the situation. And this is one of the first times that you really had that kind of thing on screen, where she was able to, sort of hold on to her personal beliefs about exerting violence and not being a violent person, but still being able to defend herself. Of course, she had to commit violence to get through the situation, but she didn't have to engulf herself with it. She could still use her mind to get out of it. And I just think that's a really great piece of the film. I think that's a really important portrayal of people in general, but especially women in high pressure situations, dangerous situations, that that there are other ways to exit a situation. I think that's an important message to send out, especially in a world where people honestly believe that fight or flight are your only 2 options in a bad situation. And I think that that's something that the smart final girl kind of like plays into our society's idea, especially of getting into dangerous situations. And it's like, fight or flight is, their only expectation of your behavior. Anything else, and people can't understand how that was a method of survival. But so often freezing is an option and can lead to you being okay in the end. So I think it's important that people understand that message, and they understand why so many people, for example, who may be in situations with sexual assault, might not exactly do what they believe they should have done. There are other ways to survive. There are other ways to make it through. And I think characters like that are just an important portrayal of that message that goes out. Another character that exemplifies that, obviously, is Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street, like my shirt today. She is, arguably in the circle of horror, like the smartest final girl. That might be something that we could like think about a little more since, that movie came out. But I think historically, of all of them, she was absolutely the smartest because of the way she handled that situation. She studied that situation from the very beginning. She was intent on knowing everything she could know about Freddie, about her parents, about that town, about the school, about everybody. She wanted to know it all. And she never said, I'm not going to ask this question. I'm not going to figure this out. It was a constant like thirst for information is what led to her being like the victor or the survivor in that situation. So that's another example of people who just have been written in a way that really portrays more than one version of survival. And I think that is an important thing to see in film, especially when you're talking about young women. So the other thing I really wanted to talk about that's extremely exciting is the Saw movie that will be coming out May 14th. I'm very excited about this. They pushed up the date, which is even better. For anyone who doesn't know this, I adore the Saw series. I think it might be like one of the most important that's ever happened. And I realized that the graphic violence, because I don't actually think it's gratuitous. I think there are moments that are gratuitous, but I think the violence in those films does have purpose if you can, pay attention long enough to like, do the work, the mental work to see where that's coming from. So I'm very excited to see what they're going to do with this next installment, because it is supposed to sort of turn everything on its head. And the series itself is, it's more than a rumination on, gratitude and the gratitude for life. It's way more than that. That's definitely an element of the situation, but it's not everything. So just one second. Okay, just more technical things I had to take care of. So yes, the Saw series. Um, so what I'm really excited about this next one is I want to see what they're able to do with the cop characters, because so much of what's been carried in the other films is those main characters, the police officers, and the whole like dramatic mess of what's actually going on in the police force, which I think is something that people miss about that movie. They're so focused on the angles with Jigsaw and what's going on there that they forget it's actually a movie about police corruption at the end of the day. That's what the whole thing is about, and how far it goes up and how like wide it goes and all of that. Because without those storylines about what's going on within the police force, the series really doesn't have a lot of movement, even if you just cover Jigsaw. There's not a lot of movement without, you know, the institutional like, you know, accountability that the film is looking for, because it's not just, you know, the police force that the film is asking for accountability from. This is also a movie about, you know, a movie series and the accountability of the medical industry, of the insurance industry, you know, of how we treat mental illness, how we treat drug addiction. You know, it interrogates all those different institutions in our society and asks like, you know, how are they part of the problem? What is their accountability level simply for being like poorly constructed and for having the wrong direction and the wrong needs? So that's definitely something that the series is really trying to get people to look at, even more so than the elements of, you know, do you appreciate your life? Because think about the character, you know, of Amanda and what happened with her. That transformation is kind of proof that his idea of appreciating life isn't even what he says it is. Because if she truly developed an appreciation for life, she couldn't have ended up in the end situation she was in. And if she really developed an appreciation for life, like spoiler of the series, she would have, you know, been able to admit her involvement in the death of his child without having to cover up so much and without having to basically like backtrack on her morality as she saw it. Her decisions weren't better than they would have been if she was the person before. And I think that's an interesting thing about this series that people forget, is like his theory remains unproven. In my opinion, it remains unproven throughout the entire series, like up until right now even, because it's still not producing a better human being. So then what's the point, right? If you're not going to produce a better human being out of tactics like that, then I'm not sure the point is rehabilitation. And that's fine if he would be willing to say that. And I think that's also something about Jigsaw that I struggle with. That as a villain, he's not as introspective as I would like him to be. I find that villains, even when they're doing things I don't like, they tend to know themselves better than anybody, and they tend to be honest about their shortcomings, even if, you know, it's entirely negative. And it just feels like he's still like, up until, you know, his point of leaving the series, like as a physical character, like he never really admitted what it was all really about. Because it was certainly never about turning anybody into a better person. And we find out as the series goes on that like it's just like some of the first people that he did this with, they were never meant to escape their machines. So if you're not meant to escape the machine, then I'm not sure how this is a restorative process. And then the next character of that police officer, and he was very similar to him. Like he wasn't really out to rehabilitate anybody. And it seemed like there was like a problem with that, but I felt like that was the same track that had already been laid. It was just an honest track as opposed to pretending. So yeah, the series definitely deals a lot with institutional accountability and just how we can hold like actual structural foundational things, how you can hold them accountable for how it affects humanity. Even though it's run by human beings, the structure itself is flawed and needs attention. And so that's a lot of what the whole series is about, and part of why I enjoy it so much. So I'm really excited to see what they do with this next one and how they weave it into what we're currently experiencing, what we're currently being bombarded with, and all the questions that, everyone's facing now about, what do you appreciate about life? Do you appreciate your life? To what extent do you appreciate your life? And do you really feel that way? Is it an honest feeling for you? So that's, to me, what I see a lot of in that series. So it's very exciting to see it continue. I know for a lot of people it's like redundant and ridiculous, and like that's why you don't have to go see it. But for someone like me, it's very exciting to know that this is going to happen, and that it's probably going to continue until like the wheels fall off. So that's really fun for me to think about. So the last movie I wanted to talk about, because it's been on my mind also, is the Lords of Salem, the Rob Zombie film. I think I mentioned this a little bit in the second episode, maybe a teeny bit, because I was talking about Rob Zombie, but I have been thinking about the Lords of Salem a lot, and all the messages from that film, which that film is essentially about the witches of the Salem witch trials and the entire Holocaust of that situation. Like, it's about their retribution spiritually. It's about returning spiritually and having that retribution on the world for presuming things that weren't true. But since you presumed, like, why not give it to you? That's sort of the message of the film, is that like, give them what they ask for, which I actually think is a great message for a film like that, for a situation like that, in response to that. This is something people typically don't understand. So it's really responding to that social idea that, people have to outperform because of their whatever identity they're part of, that, isn't dominant or isn't respected or is discriminated against or subjugated, that you have to perform better than everybody else or do this better or act better. And that movie sort of says, no, give them what they ask for. And I like that. I like that about the movie. It's shot really well. The images and the sounds in that movie are like something I've never seen. It's hard to describe. The colors seem like things I've never seen, even though I have. The props seem unreal. Like, the costuming seems unreal in a lot of the off scenes. So it definitely has that quality of like making you feel like you're going through the same thing the character is going through. Like, you're not quite sure. Is she dreaming? Are we supposed to be questioning that? Is it a dream and I'm supposed to accept it? So all those things like continue to unravel throughout the film. So it's essentially about a radio DJ in Salem who is a direct descendant of the man who carried out the majority of the deaths for witches in that time. So there's a coven of witches. She has 3 neighbors, these 3 older women who live together. And, she essentially starts having these crazy dreams and all these weird feelings after a record gets shipped to her that she's supposed to play on air. And she plays it, and it's just really freaky, creepy, like, music that I can still, like, I can hear it right now. It was that distinct. And it didn't have any words or anything like specific. And so she plays it and she doesn't think anything of it. And then the dreams start and the weird feelings start, and she's getting sick and she's like seeing things around the corner, and like, you're just not sure if she's like hallucinating or something happening to her, or did she take something? So you're sort of going through the film with those same hesitant feelings, because you're not really that sure whether the music has anything to do with it or not, or whether it's just her fear, considering where she lives, what she does, what she's around, whether it's just sort of like a placebo with her mind, but in reality, it's not happening. So you're sort of going throughout the film, and as she's trying to figure out what's going on, you're on the same page of like piece by piece figuring out who these 3 women are, what the point is. And like the last like 20 minutes of that film are just like mind-blowing, because you just go into this other world, and essentially the idea is they gave her to the devil to bring forth his son as payback for being taken out by this man. So that's like they used his family line to corrupt the world, essentially. And they're using this main character to do so by, you know, dragging her to hell and making her have this baby. It's like really intense, and it's a really intense message about how you can pay for the sins of your father, literally, and how that sin was never going to be theirs to, you know, to deal with, that it was always going to be yours, and sort of that message about people dealing in situations that they're not going to have the consequences for, you know, playing chess with people's lives when that maneuver will never actually affect them. So the movie definitely gets into those aspects as well, of like, you know, what you do affects other people, plain and simple. No matter which way you want to slice it, everything you do affects the people around you, even, you know, 5-6 generations down. So I think that's a really great movie. If you can get through it, it is hard to watch. There's a lot of jarring scene changes and things like that, so it can be difficult to watch. But you know, if you are a Rob Zombie fan, if you've liked any of his films, then you'll find, you know, positives in this. And I think if you're somebody who just likes witch films, like if you're into that, you know, subgenre of horror, then you're definitely going to like Lords of Salem. So I would definitely say to give that a try. Okay, so that was really all I had on my mind today. Thank you to everyone who was able to make it. Thank you to everybody who's going to be watching it later. I appreciate that. Just wanted to keep it kind of like to my brain today, and I didn't want to stretch it out any further than what my brain was thinking. So those were the topics that I would suggest everybody kind of mull over. If you have a chance to watch any of the films I mentioned, please do it. If you need any directives on where they can possibly be found, like if they're free online or anything, I'm always available. You can reach out to me through the YouTube channel, through Facebook, through email. So please do. So thank you everyone for coming, and have a great night, and we will see you for episode 4. Okay, thanks.